President Cyril Ramaphosa has once again extended the deadline for the final report into the Public Investment Corporation. This is now the third extension, and at the request of Justice Lex Mpati, who headed the Commission of Inquiry into the PIC. Now, the PIC Board last week presented its annual report to Parliament's Finance Committee. It came against a backdrop of allegations of poor governance, bad management and political influence following 2 years of intense scrutiny by the Commission. Justice Mpati was expected to submit his final report to the President by the end of this month, but that deadline has now been extended to the middle of December. The PIC is a state-owned entity responsible for investing about 2 trillion rand in government employee pensions. The PIC's chair, Dr. Reuel Khoza, is here in studio with us to talk a little bit about the operations at the PIC. Good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for coming in.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Leanne, and good morning to the audience of Morning Live.
How's the PIC doing? It's been a very, very tough time for the PIC, but since you've moved in there, what would you say has been a bit of progress there?
There's been a fair amount of progress since we got in there on the 12th of July. We have been able to review some of the procedures that govern the way the PIC actually works. The first port of call was to review the Memorandum of Incorporation because there were a few anomalies. In fact, there were 2 or 3 versions of that. We got that cleaned up. But the most urgent job, as we see it, is resourcing what you might call the C-suite, the top echelons of the organization, because the majority of people serving there are, in fact, acting. And you cannot have an organization the size of PIC run by acting executives. We don't have the chief executive who retired a little prematurely because of the cloud hanging over him. We do not have a chief financial officer because of questions around the manner in which she actually made certain decisions, investment decisions. And we do not even have a chief operating officer, and all of those kinds of positions need to be addressed. But very, very significantly, the erstwhile chief executive arrogated to himself 2 major responsibilities, that of chief executive and that of chief investment officer. And those 2 will have to be separated. And both of them, as we speak, are not filled.
Yeah. So how long do you think it'll take to fill those? I know I'm looking at the date of when you last made a comment. It was quite a while ago. You were saying that it would take about 6 months to fill that position. How are we doing? 3 to 6 months. How are we? How close are you to appointing these major positions?
We have gone some way. With a state-owned enterprise like that, you don't just go out and recruit. You actually have to go through a procurement process that enables you to identify whoever is going to help you identify the applicants, the recruitment agency. It's a service provision, and you cannot actually just decide willy-nilly. You have to go through due process of establishing the manner in which you have to actually go about recruiting and who you are going to work with. This we have already done, and we are in the process now of selecting who would actually be working with us in recruitment. Yeah.
CEO.
So within the next week or 2, we'll be knowing exactly who we shall be working with.
Excellent. All right, so we'll get further developments.
And then following that, you go through the processes of advertising, shortlisting, and ultimately appointing and recommending to the Minister for endorsement.
In other words, going through the proper channels, something
Certainly.
that the PIC has not been doing
Correct.
for a very long time.
Correct.
You yourself admitted to that when you were coming out with the annual statement before Parliament. You were talking to political interference, lapses in corporate governance, a couple of other things that you mentioned there.
Correct.
Is, there's a lot of issues that plague the PIC.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about this, the state of the PIC as you found it.
It's fairly parlous, but the performance proceeded apace in terms of delivery. The PIC is still very, very sustainable. And in terms of cover for those whose pensions we are looking after, we are on a very, very sound basis and will be able to honor any claim that there may be. Typically, the majority of pension funds worldwide would have something in the region of 75% cover. The PIC is currently standing at 108% cover, which means the pensioners are at no risk as things stand now, but things were beginning to deteriorate somewhat, because a year ago that cover was 115, but because of the malfeasance of the people who were given the responsibility to run the organization, it dropped to the level that I've just referred to. And we got to stem that tide and make sure that the organization stands on terra firma, that pensioners' money is actually looked after in the best way possible, applying the best corporate governance standards that essentially are available in the country. And South Africa is supposed to be one of the leaders where corporate governance is concerned, and will make sure that the best standards are adhered to.
Do you feel that political interference has now been stopped? Because that was a major concern.
Oh, certainly. The board that was, it was by nomination, were invited. And it comprises 14 people. 2 belong to the past board, as it were, to provide continuity, and 12 were handpicked from what you might consider amongst the best directors in the country. And we want to believe that having brought that together, and also having moved away from the PIC being chaired by a government nominee, the deputy minister.
That in itself is a problem. I mean, in years before, having our deputy finance minister as the chair of the PIC, now you've taken up their position. That's a big shift.
We believe it's a very, very big shift. In fact, the minister spent a bit of time with us, emphasizing that the organization has got to be run along private sector lines, that there will be no interference, political or otherwise, that we will be held accountable like the board of any leading major corporation. And we believe that's a very, very significant move from what was there historically.
Absolutely.
Ministers are not necessarily corporate governance experts. And for an organization the size of the PIC, you need perhaps the best that you can put together to run.
So let's look at the business publication reporting that the PIC's 2019 annual report provided no detailed disclosure of listed and unlisted investments, of bonds, of loans, of unpaid interest. What is the case here? What's happening there?
I believe, I don't know who might have read that annual report. It actually does give all of the details of what we are invested as listed investments, which actually account for 70% of the organization's investment, and the unlisted are in the region of 20%. And those that, the investments that we have outside of South Africa constitute something like 10%. And all of those details are actually in the annual report.
Including the unlisted, including the loans, the bonds, the unpaid interest, all of that.
So certainly. I mean, if you did not cover that, what would your annual report be covering? I think that was a misread. So
this we're saying is a misread, because I know that there were some business publications questioning that. And I mean, when you look at that, it should be, that is public interest.
Take away that, what are you reporting on?
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. I'm glad you clarified that. This same report says that the PIC paid a dividend of 80 million rand to government off the back of income on assets owned primarily by the state employee pension. Can you get us clarity on that?
We followed due process. There was enough money to, the liquidity test has had to be passed amongst others. And the previous year, we had declared a dividend of 60 million. And there was enough funds actually to declare a dividend to the shareholder in the region of 80 million. We do that because essentially standing on financial terra firma, we have satisfied the criteria that lead to you taking a decision like that.
Yeah. Ayo, You gave an update in Parliament regarding IO and this issue. What is the action to be taken around that case?
We, as a board, are going to make sure that any decision that was made in a manner that is irregular, that is flouted protocol or procedure, will actually be looked at very, very, very closely. And where IO is concerned, I believe it is now common knowledge that the procedure for giving that loan of 4.3 billion was not appropriate. One single individual, an executive, actually gave that kind of approval without even taking it to the board. That is, hence there was a suspension of that particular individual. And that's a huge amount, an amount that was based on a value of IO that was very, very highly inflated. I believe at listing, the share price was putatively 43 rands, and 24 hours later, it was standing at about 22. Yeah. And today, it's standing at about 14. Something was grossly untoward, and we want to believe that due process was not followed, because that could actually have been unearthed. Had that been taken to the board, and the board exercised its mind, they could actually have asked the kinds of questions that would have revealed that the value of IO was unduly inflated.
Yeah, consequences thereof. I mean, as you say, this individual who you're referring to has been suspended. I mean, where are we on investigations on this?
That is actually given airing at the Justice Mpati's was named commission. She actually appeared there and gave her version of what actually happened. And our sense is that, in fact, something grossly untoward actually took place. But we shall await the report of Justice Mpati.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, there have been postponements, and that actually introduces a bit of uncertainty. But we want to believe that given the fact that we actually have access to the workings of Justice Mpati, we can, in the meantime, rely on the Companies Act, rely on good corporate governance, rely on all manner of regulations that actually regulate the functioning of the PIC. We don't have to wait until the report is released.
Yeah, which I can imagine for you. I mean, this is the third time that it has been delayed. Now we're expecting it at the end of December.
Correct.
Your faith in the Commission with all these delays, is it, as you say, you feel you can do things, but to a certain extent your hands are tied. I mean, you are waiting on that Commission.
Yeah.
Is it frustrating for you?
It is quite frustrating, because we would like to move sure-footedly. And you can't, whilst the Commission is actually working on investigating the irregularities in the organization that you are running. But that notwithstanding, we don't believe whatever findings they come up with will deviate from the Companies Act, from the best practice in corporate governance, from the other regulations that actually regulate the manner in which state-owned enterprises should be regulated. There shall be spotlights on some of the irregularities, and perhaps recommendations on what tightening should actually take place. But whilst waiting for that, you cannot go full blast knowing that the Commission might actually come up with recommendations for certain fundamental changes. I
want to jog your memory a little bit and bring up UDM leader Bantu Holomisa. I'm sure you read the letter. You know all about it. I mean, he obviously wrote this open letter to the president last year. It was entitled Unmasking Harith and Lebashe's alleged fleecing on the PIC, on how the rich are plundering the PIC through companies. Have you applied your mind to it? Have you looked into that letter, into those allegations at all?
Those allegations actually are the allegations that precipitated
The commission.
The commission.
Yeah.
And
again, so that's something that we're waiting on.
Yeah, we want to believe that the commission will actually delve quite deep into those. We appreciate the fact that Holomisa, in a sense, was a whistleblower. And whistleblowing is going to be encouraged where we are concerned. We understand that whistleblowing can, in fact, be pretty risky. We will make sure that those that do the whistleblowing, their identities are actually protected. And we'll go beyond that to make sure that, in fact, they are not unnecessarily exposed to risk.
Yeah. I think something that the public want to hear, and I understand and respect the commission is still sitting, we haven't got those findings, we're waiting on them. But are you in a position to tell us if any action whatsoever has been taken by the PIC in terms of criminal or civil, any form of action?
The two culprits that were involved in the VBS, we actually pursued to a point where they have now been declared delinquent. But we're not going to stop there. I think one or both of them are, in fact, qualified lawyers. We're going to make sure that they actually get disbarred from practicing as lawyers, having committed this malfeasance. Where Steinhoff is concerned, for instance, we are party to a class action against the organization. As you know, it's an international organization that's registered in Holland or the Netherlands, and actually is trading on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. So there are many moving parts, and we have made common cause with other creditors to make sure that we access what we can access by way of value in terms of physical assets, in terms of those organizations that are under it that are still operating. Because if you're looking at market cap, that has virtually disappeared. I mean, up to 98% of the market cap got wiped out. But that doesn't mean there's nothing of value that we could access to ameliorate the pain and damage that was inflicted by Steinhoff.
I know I'm jumping from one topic to another because there is so much to talk to you about, and we're running into time problems, but I have to address the Eskom issue because that was a great concern for pension holders and people that look at the state of Eskom. We saw another bailout. We struggled with load shedding last week. They're in huge financial difficulty. There was talk that the PIC, one of the biggest owners of Eskom's debt, to convert its 90 billion holding into equity. What is the latest on this?
The executives have been working on that, and looking into a number of models of what could in fact be done if we were to find our way clear from moving our investment by way of the Eskom bond to equity. That would actually help the organization a great deal, because then they would not have to pay excessive or exorbitant interest rates. But that has not been deliberated upon by the board. The board will be meeting early in November to look at, amongst others, how best we could actually play our role without tinkering with hard-earned pensions of pensioners. Yeah. That is our fundamental responsibility. We're not going to do anything that will be inimical to the value of the pension fund.
Wouldn't touching Eskom be a big threat anyway? I mean, one of the biggest concerns as allegations coming out of the commission is that management deliberately ignored sound advice and ended up with investment decisions that actually failed the return. And, this is on behalf of your clients. Eskom, do you think that this is something that will benefit anybody besides Eskom, which it looks like that money may just be swallowed into a hole?
No, but I mean, if we do make that conversion, which we have not deliberated on, it will not be without conditions. One of the major concerns that we have where Eskom is concerned is we don't believe that it's actually resourced by well-qualified management. And this also against the background of many of the managers or executives who ran Eskom during its heydays still accessible. there are a good number of those that could actually help turn Eskom around. Why they're not being approached, in fact, baffles us. So if we were, for whatever reason, to help come to the rescue of Eskom, whatever help we proffer will not be without conditions.
We leave it there. We know your time is valuable. We thank you so much for updating us on the situation in the PIC. Talking to us here in studio, Public Investment Corporation's Chair, Dr. Reuel Khoza, updating us on some of the workings at the PIC. Thank you very much,
Leanne, and thanks to the audience.
Thank you. The time, exactly 8 o'clock. Let's get your news from Sakina.